Welcome to the PIDE webinar. This is indeed a very fortunate event that we are going to hold a webinar on aid today, a very reported, under-researched, under-thought-out subject. PIDE is a think tank that should look into these things, and we are trying to get into that. So we've requested Minister Omer Ayub Khan, who has been in very important portfolios and now is taking over aid. And I must say I'm grateful, very grateful to Omer Ayub Saab for joining us, taking out his time and joining us. I think it's absolutely wonderful when ministers and important policymakers do that. I really admire Omer for doing this. Thank you, Omer Ayub Minister Saab. Let me just quickly start. So, Minister Saab, we have a few, we want you to talk to us about aid. What is our aid policy? Should we think about aid? How should we, what are we benefiting from aid, etc.? And as I spoke to you earlier, and I would like to propose to you that PIDE should do an aid evaluation exercise because it's an important exercise to do. Now, Minister Ayub needs no introduction. He comes from a very illustrious family, a political family, and he's done a lot of political, got a very good career, mashallah, has been in government before, and is coming into the government again for the second or the third time, I think, a young man. We have a lot of expectation of you, Minister, and I was very pleased to learn that you are a risk taker. We need risk takers in these positions. For all of you, Minister Ayub is a hang glider, which is a very risky sport, but mashallah, we need people like that who are willing to take risks. So Minister Saab, we are going to impose on you to take a bit of a risk. So let me just quickly ask you a few questions. I mean, I have a series of questions, but we'll listen to you. But very quickly, let me point out to you that we are an aid-dependent country. Let's not try and mince words. We are addicted. This is the history of our IMF programs. Since independence, there hasn't been a decade where we haven't had two programs at least. So we've been in the middle of programs all the time. Now, IMF is the International Emergency Ward, and we are the only country that seems to go there to get glucose and whatever, first aid. And we can't seem to give up the IMF. So, Minister Saab, you have to tell us whether we can give up the IMF or not. But secondly, let's look at the foreign assistance chart. We have so many donors, and all of them want to call the shots. Europeans especially, even though Europe has only a small fraction of the money they give us. DFID, for example, is very strong. Again, it doesn't have a lot, but these people control a lot of policy. So that's one subject that we want to talk about. So the first question to you, Minister Saab, is Pakistan aid, would you agree Pakistan is an aid-dependent country with our thesis? And does aid really help us? Sir, over to you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Saab. Pleasure to be here, and all the participants whoever have logged in on this webinar. And it was a pleasure seeing you yesterday as well after some time. I think this is a great initiative, and we should have more of it on various topics, and PIDE is doing a great job. Having said that, the two drafts that you said, are we an aid-dependent country? The answer to that is yes and no. Yes, in the fact that nobody pushes us to go over the precipice and land ourselves in trouble. Circumstances and policies taken land us in trouble, whereby we go to the lender of last resort, if you may, the International Monetary Fund, and ask for support for currency stabilization, balance of payment support, etc. Let us just go back in history and just look at the genesis of these organizations. After the First World War, the League of Nations was created, and after the Second World War, the League of Nations was created to bring about stability in foreign policy. After the Second World War, the Bretton Woods institutions in 1945 were created to bring about economic stability, or economic, I should say, support for countries in need, there were various countries who took loans or aid from the International Monetary Fund, the Bretton Woods institutions, World Bank, IBRD, NIGA, etc., etc. Pakistan was one of them as well. The crux of the matter is that we should have graduated from there. The reason being that we have got an excellent human resource pool within Pakistan. We've got economists, we've got engineers, we've got other people as well. Unfortunately, that has not taken place. There are various reasons for that. And if the question in the Q&A session, we can certainly delve into the reasons for those for the last 74 years or so. But we did land ourselves in trouble, not one time, but repeatedly. Now, when this government came into power, I still remember I was sitting with the Prime Minister of Pakistan and with the then Finance Minister, Mr. Omer and others in Bani Ghana, and we were looking at the position. Now I'm talking about approximately beginning December 2018. And we were looking at some of the economic numbers. I was the Minister of Energy at the time for power, and what we saw basically shocked us. We just had 2 weeks of reserve because that's what the previous government had left for us. And the pressure on the rupee was increasing, yawning current account deficit, and that was going to create even that was basically a snowballing effect. So those were the circumstances with which we had been left with. And slowly and steadily, we've tried to extricate ourselves from that situation. Now, coming back to your question, are we an aid-dependent country? Let's look at it in this way. For if we are an economy of approximately, if you take the official figures of $300 billion, our GDP is $300 billion plus or minus. What we don't take into account is our informal economy as well. And that, Dr. Saab, you are the most, I should say, qualified to comment on that as well. We take our informal economy, that comes to approximately the same size of our formal economy. So overall, if you look at our economy, it's almost a $550, $600 billion economy overall, formal and informal together. So that gives us some cushion over there. Now, having said that, are we aid dependent so far as the stabilization of rupee was concerned, going to the IMF was concerned at that time? I think it was a matter of necessity. It was a matter of necessity because from our import bill, approximately, we were using approximately $7 to $8 billion just on petroleum products, foodstuff imports, other imports. So these are imports which are intricately linked to the value of the dollar-rupee parity. And had we not gone there and the rupee had free fallen, I think we would have had a large current account deficit, number one. Now, we also have to realize the prescriptions given by each one of these institutions. We may differ with the solutions, with the prescriptions given. For example, what is the IMF been telling us? The IMF has been telling us that you have to increase your tax revenue. Yes, that's a good thing. We have to increase our tax to GDP ratio. Our difference of opinion with them has been over a period of time, with which the Ministry of Finance has talked to the IMF and is even now in negotiation, that if we do it immediately on a large section of the society, it's going to create social unrest, number one. So they also understand that point of view. Then we come on to the energy side, portfolio that I was also looking after till a few months ago. They said you to increase your tariffs. Yes, that's easier said than done, but we have also realized that the increase in the tariffs has come about because of large capacity payments, which were not this government's doing, but the previous government's doing, with the projects that came up, which were front-loaded. So the increase in the capacity payments made it imperative in a way that those tariff increases had to come, and we turned around to them and said, look, if we increase the tariffs beyond a certain point, the distribution companies and others are going to basically bleed even more, because people are going to be then pushed to the wall in making energy utility payments, taking out budget for their schools, for their children, school-going children's education, their food bill, etc. So these things have to be taken in context as well. Now, having said that, The prescription can vary. This is now the immediate sort of thing of quote unquote. One is the IMF help. The other is the World Bank, which is not an aid, I would say, but that's a loan, because we are shareholders of these institutions. We also contribute, and that's a loan we are taking. It's not free lunch money that we have. We have to pay for it at the end of the day. The people of Pakistan have to pay for it. Then similarly, let's come back, let's go down the road. It's something that you and I were talking about yesterday as well, and over the last few weeks as well, about the amount that, or the monies that are lent to Pakistan and the government of Pakistan borrows for the project development. Now, let's see if we see that chart that you showed. The current World Bank portfolio is approximately $14 billion, $13 to $14 billion. Asian Development Bank is approximately $12 billion. Then the various other bilaterals come to approximately, say, 20% of the total portfolio. So where does this money go? Now, is it donor-driven, the projects that we're talking about, or is the demand coming from the quote-unquote the final beneficiaries? And that, by that I mean the provinces of Pakistan, the provincial governments, and the federal government. To be very frank, I think it's a mixture of both. A lot of these projects, what should happen is that the demand should be completely from the local the beneficiaries, the governments. They should come up with the demand, which does happen even now. But the assessment of those demands, let's say the TORs, the project design, etc., that should be even more and more, in my humble opinion, it should be locally driven, with local companies, with local people leading that charge, and government taking the charge, which we are now trying to do. Now, I'll go a step further as well. The government of Pakistan, just about 2 weeks ago, the cabinet has passed basically instructions that all projects which will be run, they are going to have qualified project managers. Now, why do I say that? This is something I was talking and discussing with our World Bank colleagues over here, that the portfolio run by, for example, the World Bank or the Asian Development Bank, a lot of these portfolios, the project managers, they're not quote unquote qualified project managers over there. By that, I mean they don't have some of them don't have, not all, but some of them don't have the technical skills to run software projects for software programs like Microsoft projects or others. Now, when you don't have that, what happens is that the projects, you have three important variables in the project. The project should be on time, according to specs, and within budget. If each one of these variables deviates, you have project overruns, and that creates problems. Within this, then there are other variables as well, and we can come to that in the Q&A session as well. But for example, the growth strategy of the World Bank, the 5 Gs that the World Bank is now currently talking to us about, and we are helping, and we are devising that strategy as well. It includes girls' education, it includes growth, but what I'm pushing for is, and my team is pushing for is, that the premise of all this is, for example, farm-to-market roads. When you don't have a farm-to-market road infrastructure from rural to urban areas, how do you get your food production or your produce from farms to markets? One, when you set up schools for girls or colleges for girls and boys in rural areas or in the very urban areas, if the road network does not exist, the students, you may have a beautiful infrastructure set up there for education, but the teachers are not going to go there for obvious reasons. It's far away, the road infrastructure wouldn't be good. So that's another premise. Then we come about, when we talk about increasing the health facilities and reducing, for example, child mortality or some of the other health indicators, then we have to talk about safe drinking water supply schemes. We have to talk about the garbage disposal, sewage system treatment. So all these are, and then last but not least, we have to also realize that in Pakistan, 60% of the out of the agricultural production in Pakistan, 40% are the 4 major crops, the staple crops. 60% are vegetables, are other perishable items. So a food chain with a cold chain management, whereby the agricultural produce is taken from the farms, taken to the markets and stored there in a proper modern technique so that it does not spoil. And you won't have these wild food gyration in some of the food items, for example, cucumbers or tomatoes or other food produce or potatoes, some of the items which are staples in the diet and the cuisine of our country. So these are some of the things that we are looking at and stressing upon. Over to you, Dr. Saab. That was a preamble, so if I've gone over your allotted time, I apologize.
No, thank you very much. That was very kind. That was wonderful indeed. Let me just say, I'm very interested to learn that you just said that the World Bank is preparing a growth strategy for us. This is a problem.
Sorry, I would like to, they're not preparing for us in partnership with us. I should say that.
Okay, great. So Minister Saab, let me point out to you, we've done a review. These slides are prepared by Fahim Jahangir. I must point out, he's one of our competent researchers. He's done a thesis on aid, and he's inshallah going to lead a very important project for aid by us. So in his thesis, he talked about this, Kedi. Look at the number of plans we've had. And look at every government comes in and changes plans and wants to move forward with another new vision, new thoughts, new ideas. So we've had a sporadic or a fragmentation of plans and ideas. And the Planning Commission is now more or less defunct, which is why the World Bank is assisting you in the growth framework. I mean, I don't see why the World Bank should be assisting when we've got a Planning Commission, PIDE, and many other agencies. So that's an issue that we should come to. Now let's look at this. We have been outsourcing our policy, Minister Saab, since the very beginning. Gustav Papanek came here and built our first plans and did our first policies. We've talked to him. He's sitting there at 90 in Boston. We talked to him. The webinar is on YouTube. And he told us that, look, we took control of your policy because you had nobody, and we fixed everything. Then Doxiadis came along and made Islamabad for us. Then if you look at us, we do country partnership strategies all the time. And I was in the Planning Commission, and I remember one thing, the donors refused to accept Planning Commission work. They said that they will make the country partnership strategy. I told them, I said, we've got a plan. Why don't you follow that? And most countries say to the donors, you follow our plan, not that you'll make it for us. But they have country partnership strategies. We have an unbundling of WAPDA done by the World Bank. We have an IPPs done by the World Bank. We've got the NGOs and SAP done by SAP. We got all our regulatory laws have been written by international agencies. NEPRA was written by the USAID. We've had TARP done by DFID. We've had access to justice done by ADB. We've even had the PRSP. The IMF set the PRSP, which was done by the consultants from various agencies, and the PRSPs are growth plans. So again, Planning Commission is kind of bypassed. So my question to you, Minister, is: have we outsourced our policy making? Who makes some policies? And do these policies really deliver? When the donors unbundled WAPDA, was it okay? When they gave us IPPs, was it okay? What's the thinking of the government on this? G, go ahead.
Dr. You've made a very important point, and as we were discussing yesterday, and what I just said before in my opening statement, that nobody forces us to do this. I think there has been what you can quote unquote mission creep over the years. In the initial stages, you could say, after independence, when we went to these institutions and we were still a young country and we had a dearth of qualified professionals, the argument could have been made that, yes, we required the help. But right now, we have PhDs, we've got experts, we've got other people, economists, we've got economists who are working for these very institutions in Washington, DC, in Manila, in other countries of the world, and running their programs for them. Case in point yourself, case in point our President Governor, State Bank, Dr. Raza Paket, and a lot of other people I can mention, Dr. Yaqub Saab, former Governor, State Bank, Dr. Ishrat Saab, all professionals. So I think it's now time, and what we were discussing is that we are going to make sure and interject and insist that these programs, if there is an analysis to be done, institutions such as PIDE, when I was given this portfolio, one of the first things that I did was hold a meeting across all the ministries for the analysis of the current account deficit, because we have to analyze what are the variables of the current account deficit. And we have to then fine tune it. For example, if one variable of imports is increasing and we have to go for local programs or import substitutions, we have to do it on an analytical basis. And I requested your team members to come and to we made these two teams within that meeting. And this week or early next week, they'll be coming back to us and then running sensitivity analysis on those. So there's no dearth of people. I think it's basically getting the right people together and creating that sort of very robust and enable team with clear TORs and enable them and say, this is what the government requires. This is the sort of input activity that we require. For example, we have if with the current account deficit, what will it mean? A large current account deficit for items which I would, for example, if I would label them luxury goods, do we really don't need those items? And analysis on those items. And then if that current account deficit goes out of hand, that as it used to in the past, then where does that leave us? It leaves us. It basically then leaves us into taking up additional debt. The debt profile, the debt to GDP ratio. So all these variable factors have to be analyzed by the numbers analytically. We have the wherewithal, and inshallah, this is something that your organization, PIDE, the Ministry of Finance and EAD, we've set out to do and correct that our local homegrown strategy is the one that is going to work. We know the system, we know the ground realities, and we can make it work. And the other important factor is that a lot of, let's face it, let's call a spade a spade. The quote unquote donor money that comes in from various bilaterals, etc., the experts that come in from there, almost if you look at the hourly billing rate, they are not billing on the local Pakistani rate, they are billing at their rate. So those rates are much higher. So if you look at a program, I'm just giving you a figure of $100,000, for example. So a good chunk of that money, correct me if I'm wrong, Dr. You've been on working with some of these institutions, almost 35 to 40% gets recycled back in terms of the payment to the experts to come and work here or look at the programs, and what's left for the the project on the ground is almost say 50 to 55% or maybe 60%. So we can increase the envelope which can be used on the ground in a much better fashion when we have our own local expertise engaged in these activities. Over to you, Dr.
Thank you, thank you, Minister Saab. Very kind of you, very good response. But let me now go forward in my quest. We are trying to find out more about aid. Now, if you look at that, Minister Saab, we have a huge multiplicity of aid projects. Canada, for example, has a very small amount of aid, but 104 projects. If you look at US, 1.717 billion, and they have 404 projects, and many of them are not within the government. Many of them are outside the government. So this aid, I don't even know how much we receive. We run after the aid, but I don't know how much we receive. We've had, I know there's another young man, Hossein Nadeem, who's studied this thing, USAID, and he's come to the conclusion that of the $7.5 billion, if I remember right, and I may be wrong, but I think roughly, out of 7.5 billion US aid that came in, only 1 billion came to us. So this is a huge issue that we face. So the question is, once again, donors are very relevant to policy making. Donors are the people who make our policies. We have to accept it. And donors are the people who have access to the government. Academia, we've got right now 231 universities, 33 think tanks, and none of them have access to the government. None of them have access to the government. I have never seen vice chancellors being or professors, forget vice chancellors, who cares about them? They're administrators. Professors being invited to any EAC or any government meeting, but donors are there everywhere. Donors see the Prime Minister almost on a daily basis. Ministers, I don't know whether EAD knows about this or not. Do you know about the aid contractors? Nobody collects data on the aid contractors. There's Chemonics, which has, I think, at any given time, it has $200 or $300 million. DAI at any given time has a few $100 million. OPM at any given time has about $10-30 million. ASI currently has $50 million in KPK. So these guys have hundreds of millions. These people, Minister, We can't pay our salaries. Most universities, you've heard, they can't pay their salaries, and the government doesn't want to talk to them. So may I suggest to you that we close these places down and just let the donors make all your policies? Another thing related to this that I might put on the table, there is discrimination, huge amount of discrimination. All the professors here who are listening to this talk, they get a fraction of what the foreign consultants get. And I've written papers on this even in the fund, that this is a huge problem for many reasons, not just that there's discrimination, but also because talent-wise, you have better talent at home than the guys who come here. And I can go into that, but I won't. So the question is, Minister Sahab, you have a system here, and I'm not saying it's your fault, but you have a system, we have a system in place since 1947. Where the donors control our policy, but they have the advantage, they have the money, they have the ability to put forward glossy reports to the government gives them access, their embassies back them. Our universities, poor universities, are sitting there starved. How would you like to change the situation, and would you think it's okay? Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Very thought-provoking and continuation of what both of us were discussing in my office yesterday morning as well. I'll start from there. Number one is that can this carry on? And the answer is simply no. As I mentioned earlier as well, we've got our homegrown solution. We've got our own personnel in Pakistan, our human resource in Pakistan, which can do a better, can do an equally good job, or if not better, number one. Number two is the donor flows. Let's come to that. Now, in PIDE, we are going to be, we've taken the, basically the NGOs policy, and that means that pertain to basically the NGO funding flows, be very precise to the cabinet, and we were asked to look at certain aspects. So we are finalizing that in the next 1 or 2 weeks and taking it back to cabinet so that the flows, at least of the NGOs, etc., are routed and cleared out in the Economic Affairs Division. That is point number one. Point number two, where was this money going for before this? People didn't have any idea. They were going directly. The embassies in Pakistan, they could go out, outreach to XYZ place, go out, fund those programs, and the government, the provincial government or the district government or XYZ had no idea. That is something that we've changed, number one. And we are going to further change that and have a system whereby at least we should know what is being funded, what is the money being used for, number two. And for the universities, etc., I think the emphasis that our Prime Minister has been putting, because he's an educationalist, he's a philanthropist, he's been raising money throughout the world for his programs, for Namal University, for Shakit Khanum as well. I think he knows the system as well. So he's also very keen that our own local universities get the maximum impetus. So this is something which I think we have to have a discussion with, and I would encourage you, PIDE, because we are, so to speak, in the boiler room, in the operations room on a day-to-day basis. So you in PIDE, Dr. Sahab, you take the lead of organizing a conference, and we'll be more than happy to come and interact with the academia and have a policy or have a thinking process whereby the university professors and others in the academia or in the business circles can sit together and say that this is a template we want to derive or we want to make. And I'll go a step further. Let's look at some of the game-changing technologies, what you and I were discussing yesterday as well. I think I just lost, okay, sorry, I just lost the link for a second. Can you hear me, Doctor?
We can hear you very well. Go ahead.
All right, I just lost the link for a second.
No problem.
Right. So what we have to stress on something called the triple helix approach, whereby we have the business community, we have the academia, and we have the government. Because at this point in time, if we take, for example, some of the enabling technologies, our businesses alone are not large enough to put in money, for example, venture capital funds, where they invest in 10 technologies and one technology is a gem, and that's a game changer. For example, your Microsofts of the world, the other technologies that are out there. So that is something that we have to come in and we have to create this triple helix approach of academia, government, as well as the business, and then come about with technologies or research that sees the light of day at the end of the day, that can be basically be put to use, not for the research for the research sake of research is important, but then giving teeth to that research and making it practically applicable in various fields. That's very important. And I'll take for example a field which is close to my heart. It's the aerospace industry. Pakistan has a burgeoning aerospace industry. We produce fighter aircraft in Pakistan. So a combination of the military side, the academia, the engineering university side. In my constituency now, we have an institute called the Partial Chile, which is a technical training quote-unquote university, where robotics, artificial intelligence systems are being taught. So these are the fields in which, and similarly, there should be tremendous amount of research that should be funded in our food security. That's a neglected area. That is where we should be putting, because we have to feed a population of 210 million people plus, and we have to make sure that that newer crops are available, newer seeds are available. Similarly, on the industry side, we've got a light engineering sector. So competition to be able to export some of these products, we have to get out of just our woven fabric or our gray fabric. We have to go out towards automobile engineering, the polymer engineering. So these are the places where we have to, I think, create centers of excellence, and we have to create clusters which can be funded with and research with academia, government, and basically the business community. Over to you, Dr. Saab.
Thank you, Omer Saab. Minister Saab, I'd also like to ask here, for information, because this is a question that I ask at many webinars and many conferences. Are there any donors listening to the minister today? I thought not. Minister Saab, I again worry about it, that these people who are making policies for us, who are setting a growth strategy, who are doing education policy for us, etc., they refuse to listen to Pakistani intellectuals. When the universities or think tanks like PIDE are hosting a conference, I seldom see donors here. In fact, never. They see themselves as above us. We call them to ask them to come and talk to us in terms of present their work to us. They also shy away from that. Now, as a minister in charge of this, how comfortable do you feel that the donors who are prescribing for us, who are, mashallah, doing all these things for us, giving us technical assistance, training, etc., that they should not be listening to anything that the Pakistani intellectual says? I'll go further. They also take our work and never feel the necessity of citing the local intellectual. Apart from paying them less, they don't even want to cite them. So there is an inherent bias here. I won't call it a stronger word, that nothing that we do here is worth their time. Is that something you're comfortable with when you talk to them and they come to you regularly for policy input?
So the answer to that is very easy, I would say. I think it's incumbent upon both of us in the positions that we hold. I, as Federal Minister for Economic Affairs, yourself heading PIDE, that we insist that our local talent is included, that they go out and reach out to the talent and include them in the meetings, include them in the discussion. That's a very simple sort of thing, and I think we should make it happen. There is no excuse for it. I'll be very candid. The buck stops with us. We will make it happen.
Great. Thank you, Minister. Let me turn to the floor. Akhtar Safzal.
Ji, Assalamu alaikum. Can you hear me?
Ji, Akhtar Safzal, go ahead.
Ji, Assalamu alaikum, Honorable Minister Saab, Honorable Vice Chancellor Saab. Omer Ayub Saab, you are a beacon of hope to a lot of young people around the nation. We thank you for your service. और मैं आपसे ये सवाल पूछना चाह रहा था डॉक्टर नदीम के पॉइंट से, लेकिन पहले मैं थोड़ा सा अपना तारुफ करा दूं. मेरा नाम डॉक्टर अब्दुल अफजल है. आई एम द प्रोग्राम डायरेक्टर एंड प्रोफेसर ऑफ इकोनॉमिक्स एट हबीब यूनिवर्सिटी इन कराची, और इससे पहले मैं नस्ट इस्लामाबाद में पढ़ाया करता था. तो सर सवाल डॉक्टर नदीम के सवाल से लूँगा. ये इन्होंने बात करी कि आप पॉलिसी पोजीशंस के अंदर बहुत से डोनर्स या डोनर्स में जो लोग काम कर चुके हैं उनको लाके ले आते हैं, इसमें 2 इश्यूज निकलते हैं. नंबर 1, इट्स एन इशू ऑफ कॉम्पिटेंस, एंड नंबर 2, इट्स एन इशू ऑफ कॉन्फ्लिक्ट ऑफ इंटरेस्ट. मैं पहले बात करूंगा कॉन्फ्लिक्ट ऑफ इंटरेस्ट. लेकिन जब आप किसी भी बाहर की कंट्री, फॉरेन कंट्री से मिलिट्री एड लेते हैं फॉर इंस्टेंस, तो आप उनका एयर मार्शल यहाँ लाके हमारा चीफ ऑफ एयर स्टाफ तो नहीं लगा देते ना, बिकॉज देयर इज अ कॉन्फ्लिक्ट ऑफ इंटरेस्ट. मतलब इसी तरह जब हम IMF से या किसी और इदारे से एड लेते हैं, तो फिर हम वहां पे जिन लोगों ने काम किया हुआ है या कर रहे हैं, उनको यहाँ लाकर प्रिंसिपल पोजीशंस में क्यों लगाते हैं? बिकॉज एट द एंड ऑफ द डे there is an adversarial relationship between a lender and a borrower. ये पहली बात. और दूसरी बात सर, कि इट्स एन इशू ऑफ कॉम्पिटेंस. मैं ADB में काम करता था बहुत साल पहले, और मुझे ये लगता था, मतलब ADB जो पाकिस्तान रेजिडेंट मिशन है, मुझे लगता था कि वहाँ पे बहुत जबरदस्त किस्म की कैलकुलेशंस होती हैं. एक दफा मैंने कोई नंबर क्वेश्चन किया अबाउट ग्रोथ, तो उन्होंने कहा कि हमारे पास एक बहुत जबरदस्त मॉडल है जिससे हम पाकिस्तान का ग्रोथ रेट कैलकुलेट करते हैं. When I did some investigation, I found out that basically they were taking an average of the last previous 3 years. तो ये दोनों इसके अंदर ये इश्यूज हैं. तो मैं चाहता हूं कि अगर आप इसको एड्रेस करें कि why is there a conflict of interest, जबकि बहुत सी और कंट्रीज ऐसा नहीं करते. थैंक यू.
ठीक है जी मिनिस्टर साहब.
जी, Dr. Safzal Saab, thank you very much for your kind words. Number one, please correct me if I understood your question correctly. आपने कहा जी conflict of interest between the donors and वहाँ पे जो impose करते हैं लोग हमारे ऊपर for doing research and creating a quote unquote a prescription. Did I hear your question correctly?
जी, मैं बेसिकली जी पॉलिसी लेवल पे बात कर रहा हूँ.
बिल्कुल ठीक है. चलिए जी.
Simple answer to that, because we let them. मतलब as simple as that. I'll be very blunt. I'm a blunt person. आप जब किसी चीज की इजाजत देंगे, दरवाजा खुला छोड़ेंगे, और वो आके मतलब आपसे कहेंगे कि ये भी आप करें, ये भी करें. अभी जिस तरह ये प्रोग्राम के बारे में हमारी वर्ल्ड बैंक के साथ गुफ्तगू जो जारी है, जिस तरह के पोर्टफोलियो मुझे मिला, तो उन्होंने फॉर एग्जांपल गर्ल्स एंड बॉयज लर्निंग, ग्रोइंग हेल्दी, ग्रीन एंड क्लीन पाकिस्तान, ग्रोथ दैट इज इंक्लूसिव, 4-5 G जो है जिनके ऊपर उन्होंने कहा कि जी इस पे हम लोग काम करना चाहते हैं. तो मैंने उनसे पूछा, साहब मुझे ये बताएं, जो मैंने स्टार्ट में जो बात की थी, मैंने कहा जी कि आप फॉर एग्जांपल आप बात करते हैं ग्रोइंग हेल्दी के पीछे क्या प्रेमिस है? ग्रोइंग हेल्दी के पीछे आपका ये है कि आपकी चाइल्ड मोर्टेलिटी है. उसके साथ आप क्या बात करते हैं कि आपके पास हमारे मैं एक इलेक्टेड आदमी हूँ, आप मतलब गांव गलियों में जाते हैं एज प्रोफेशनल्स. हम लोग जब जाते हैं अपने देहातों में, शहरों में, मोहल्लों में, वहां पे पानी की सूरेज लाइन जो है, वो जो पानी की लाइन है वो नालों से गुजर रही है, वहां पे लीकेज होती है, तो आपका हेपेटाइटिस और बाकी बीमारियां क्या नहीं जाएंगी, उसका पहले हम लोग एड्रेस करें. बजाय इसके कि हम लोग एक बेहतरीन शानदार हेल्थ फैसिलिटी बना रहे हैं, वो भी जरूरी है, पर उसकी रूट कॉज को भी तो एड्रेस करें ना, उस पर हम लोग इन्वेस्टमेंट करें. अच्छा, फिर दूसरी चीज ये है कि आपके इन प्रोजेक्ट्स को आप फर्ज मान $100 मिलियन का प्रोजेक्ट आप लगाते हैं, उस पे आपकी कंसेशनल लेंडिंग आपको इंटरेस्ट रेट भी मिलता है, बट एट द एंड ऑफ द डे अगर साहब वो आपने पैसा वापस भी तो करना है ना, कौन का पैसा है, तो उसकी मैनेजमेंट के लिए हमने क्या करना कि वो अमाउंट जो है, बजाय इसके कि वो आपका प्रोजेक्ट मैनेजर नहीं, मतलब आई एम नॉट गोइंग टू गो इनटू द डिटेल्स, बट सम ऑफ द प्रोजेक्ट्स जो पहले से चले आ रहे हैं वो कॉस्ट ओवररन्स क्यों हो रहे हैं? क्योंकि वहां पे सही प्रोजेक्ट मैनेजर्स उनको नहीं मिले, या उन्होंने लगाए नहीं, प्रोफेशनली क्वालिफाइड नहीं थे. जब ये इंसान की या एक इदारे की एक किस्म की सोच होती है तो वो तोड़नी पड़ती है. Then you have to get right people, and the other thing is you turn around and you ask those institutions के भैया, फॉर एग्जाम्पल आपकी यूनिवर्सिटी है या कराची में कोई प्रोजेक्ट है, आप यू रीच आउट टू द लोकल यूनिवर्सिटी एंड यू से कि जी हम लोग ये पैसा यहाँ पे आ रहा है, या पेशावर में ये पैसा आ रहा है, यहाँ पे हमने ये प्रोजेक्ट इनिशिएट करना है, हमारा ये लोकल टैलेंट भी हम लोग इसमें इस्तेमाल करेंगे, एंड यू नो फॉर द ब्लड एंड स्वेट दैट फॉर एग्जांपल अ पर्सन लाइक योरसेल्फ अब्दुल साहब, इफ यू आर गोइंग टू पुट इन इट देन यू गेट पेड फॉर इट. और उससे क्या होगा, उस प्रोजेक्ट की कॉस्ट जो है वो कम हो जाएगी, बिकॉज जिस तरह पहले मैंने अर्ज की थी कि तकरीबन 30-35-40% जो रकम होती है प्रोजेक्ट की कॉस्ट की, वो आपका होके मतलब चर्न होके वो वापस चला जाता है मुल्क से, उस प्रोजेक्ट में इनबिल्ट होता है. किस चीज में? कंसल्टेंसी चार्जेस में, ओवरहेड्स में. वो कम से कम चीजों से हमें बचाव मिलेगा. सो एट द एंड ऑफ द डे, टू आंसर योर क्वेश्चन, जिस पे भी हम लोग काम करें कि हम लोग अपने लोकल जो हमारा टैलेंट है उसको हम लोग यूटिलाइज कर सके. एक चीज मैं लोगों को हमेशा कहता हूँ, चाहे वो मैं अपने हल्के में हूँ, वहां पे यूनिवर्सिटीज में हूँ, कहीं पे भी हूँ, हम लोग अपने आप को बदकिस्मती से पता नहीं क्यों अंडर एस्टिमेट कर जाते हैं. हम लोग कोई छोटा मुल्क नहीं है, हम लोग 210 मिलियन लोगों का हमारा मुल्क है, विद अ ग्रोइंग इकोनॉमी. फॉर्मल इनफॉर्मल इकोनॉमी हमारी कंबाइन कर लें, $600 अरब की हमारी तकरीबन इकोनॉमी बनती है. एंड जस्ट फॉर अ रेफरेंस पॉइंट, सऊदी अरब जो कि एक ऑयल प्रोड्यूसिंग कंट्री है, जो कि इस्लामी ममालिक का सबसे बड़ा मतलब मुल्क है इन टर्म्स ऑफ इकोनॉमिक प्रोग्रेस, उनकी 800 साढ़े 800 बिलियन डॉलर की इकोनॉमी है. तो हमारे पास तेल नहीं है, हमारे पास क्या चीजें हैं, हमारे पास एग्रीकल्चर है, इंडस्ट्री है और सर्विस सेक्टर है. सो वी हैव टू, आई थिंक, बिलीव इन आवरसेल्व्स एंड assert ourselves. Over to you, Doctor. I hope I've answered your question.
Very good, Ji. Thank you. Thank you. Faisal Saeed Saab.
Assalamu alaikum, sir. Thank you for hosting this webinar. At the outset, I'd just like to ask,
Faisal Saab, apne aap ko introduce bhi karte hain. It'll be good if you do.
I'm working as a consultant in EAD. I was hired as a consultant from the ADB. It's a short-term contract. Previously, I was working as a consultant with the Privatization Commission. Sir, my question is that the economy of Pakistan has really been has really been retarded for a few years. The growth rate, I mean, the question that really is that how do you grow this economy? I mean, we have a burgeoning population, and no government on earth, even with endless resources, can cope with this kind of population growth. And which obviously requires massive spending in infrastructure, and to be able to absorb all this, all the youth that's part of this population into into this economy. So how do you grow the economy? This is the real question. And a friend of mine went to Bangladesh a few months back, and he came back and he said, the only two kind of services that are allowed to break the red light, one is the emergency services, and the other is the export truck. So, there you go. I mean, those are their priorities. And on the other hand, in Pakistan, obviously there is a current account deficit because our exports are completely stagnant for a few decades. So my question is that, how, what is the strategy going forward to to increase the exports? Because I believe that, the only way you can grow the pie is through an export-led strategy.
Minister Saab, over to you.
Faisal Saeed Saab, very good question. Okay, now let's come to this. Abhi cabinet mein kal cabinet mein jo discussion ho rahi thi, we were looking at some of the economic indicators. जो चीज अभी यहाँ हो रही है, आपका 4 महीने पहले तक we were running a current account surplus. अभी उस साइकिल से हम लोग आहिस्ता जो है वो current account deficit की तरफ जा रहे हैं, but nomenclature उस current account deficit का क्या है? If you are going to import luxury vehicles, if you are going to imported chocolate, imported ice cream, imported XYZ, जो कि which I categorize as luxury goods, that is not good for the economy. इस वक्त आप नॉमेनक्लेचर या देखें अपने करंट अकाउंट डेफिसिट का जो इंपोर्ट में है, तो उस पे एक चीज, वी आर अ नेट एनर्जी इंपोर्टिंग कंट्री इन द सेंस ऑफ पेट्रोकेमिकल्स में हम लोग अपना जो तेल है, गैस एक्सेट्रा वो इंपोर्ट कर रहे हैं. तो वो एक बिल तकरीबन 7.5-8 अरब डॉलर का आपका हर वक्त आ रहा होता है. इसके अलावा जो बकिया इनपुट्स हैं, इस वक्त जो ट्रेंड हम लोग देख रहे हैं, जो स्टेट बैंक की टर्फ की फैसिलिटीज थी एक्सेट्रा, वो आपकी मशीनरी इम्पोर्ट्स में आ रही है। दोज आर कैपिटल इंटेंसिव गुड्स। वो गुड्स जिस वक्त अभी इन्वेस्ट होके जो अभी लग रही है, इंस्टॉल हो रही है, उसके साथ एक बाय प्रोडक्ट होगा कि आपके कई वैल्यू, फॉर एग्जांपल पेट्रोकेमिकल चेन में या पॉलीमर चेन में आपके पॉलीमर जो है पाकिस्तान में, जस्ट गिव यू फिगर, आपका पॉलीमर चेन में अप्रोक्सीमेटली पॉलीप्रोपिलीन, पॉलीएथिलीन, हाई डेंसिटी पॉलीएथिलीन, हाई लो डेंसिटी पॉलीएथिलीन, ये तकरीबन 1 मिलियन टन आप इंपोर्ट करते हैं, बिकॉज वी डोंट हैव अ लोकल नैफ्था क्रैकर प्लांट और यहाँ पे हम लोग उसको प्रोड्यूस नहीं कर रहे हैं। तो ये इंपोर्ट होता है प्राइमरीली फ्रॉम द गल्फ, सैपेक से और या फिर मतलब आपके साउथ ईस्ट एशिया से। अच्छा, अभी ये वो चीजें हैं इंपोर्ट्स की जो कि आपकी आई वुड से दे आर गुड, जिस तरह गुड और बैड कोलेस्ट्रॉल होता है, दिस इज द गुड कोलेस्ट्रॉल। नाउ ओवर अ पीरियड ऑफ टाइम वी हैव टू look at how much of import substitution can we do. Then we get into the phase कि जी हम लोग क्या, आपका competitive advantage of nations क्या होता है? Can we go and have everything import substituted? And the answer is no. We have to see basic economics 101 कि what are the things that we are good at? What are the things that we can do better than the rest of the world? क्योंकि at the end of the day या हम लोग inefficiently एक चीज produce करेंगे, consumer को hit पड़ेगी। वो एक चीज मद्देनजर रखते हुए हमारे इंपोर्ट साइड पे मैं पहले बात कर रहा हूं, और जो आपने क्वेश्चन करंट अकाउंट डेफिसिट का पूछा कि वो हम लोग बहुत क्लोजली मैनेज कर रहे हैं, और मिनिस्ट्री ऑफ फाइनेंस का इस पे रोल है। और हम लोगों ने भी अभी पाइड के डॉक्टर साहब का भी मैं बता रहा था, और आज भी मैंने अभी टॉक में बात की थी कि हम लोग पूरा एक रिगरस एनालिटिकल एनालिसिस खुद मिनिस्ट्री ऑफ फाइनेंस, हमारा डेट ऑफिस, ईएडी, पाइड, स्टेट बैंक हम लोग रन कर रहे हैं कि वो कौन सी इंपोर्ट की चीजें हैं जिसको हम लोग मॉनिटर करना है, जिसपे हमने इंपोर्ट सब्स्टिट्यूशन करनी है, और उसके साथ फिर हम लोग आपकी वेरिएबिलिटी और स्ट्रेस टेस्टिंग करेंगे और सिनेरियो एनालिसिस करेंगे कि कहाँ पे हमने बेंचमार्क्स रखते हैं 1 year, 3 years, 5 years and 10 years, and we are also giving this thing कि जी where will our economy be or what sort of economy should we be looking at 10 years from now. आज कोई रोड मैप काम करेंगे और वो हम लोगों ने करना है, बाहर नहीं करना। दैट्स ऑन द इंपोर्ट साइड। एक्सपोर्ट साइड पे आप आए, वेरी गुड क्वेश्चंस। आपका एक्सपोर्ट आपने किस चीज पे आपने करनी है? आपने ग्रे यार्न या एक्सपोर्ट करना है, या आपने सिर्फ सूतर या यार्न एक्सपोर्ट करना है, या ग्रे क्लॉथ एक्सपोर्ट करना है, वो आप नहीं कर पाएंगे। वो एक हद तक आप करेंगे, इट्स नॉट गोइंग टू बी वैल्यू एडेड। आपने जो चीजें एक्सपोर्ट करनी है, it is the information technology. We have to go to $10 billion plus. We have to go to the region of $40 billion plus just in the IT sector alone. Do we have the wherewithal for it? Yes, we do. Number one, enabling technologies है, घर में लोग बैठ के ये सारी चीजें भी कर सकते हैं, and the world has changed. COVID ने क्या? Look at the webinar we are having today. A meeting of this sort would not have happened or would not be accepted 24 months ago. लोग कम करते थे, अभी ये एक नॉर्म बन गया है। People are looking at outsourcing investment in the optical fiber cable, etc. That is a norm now. Number one, that is a technology we have to invest in. Aerospace technology is something we have to invest in. Medical sciences are technologies we have to invest in. Pharmaceutical industries, value added, light engineering. ये वो इंडस्ट्रीज है। ऑटोमोबाइल इंडस्ट्री पाकिस्तान में अभी डिलीशन प्रोग्राम हमारा बहुत ज्यादा आगे नहीं गया, काफी हद तक गया है, बट क्रिटिकल कंपोनेंट्स जो आपके प्रिसिजन इक्विपमेंट है, फॉर एग्जांपल आपके गियर की मैन्युफैक्चरिंग, आपके इंजन क्रिटिकल पार्ट्स की मैन्युफैक्चरिंग, उसकी तरफ हमने जाना है कि गाड़ी यहाँ पे बने भी, क्रिटिकल पार्ट्स भी बने, और यहाँ से हम लोग एक्सपोर्ट करें। इस वक्त मैं एनर्जी सेक्टर में था, तो हमारे पास आपके रिन्यूएबल एनर्जी के मैन्युफैक्चरर्स ऑफ, फॉर एग्जांपल विंड टर्बाइंस, ये एक विंड टर्बाइन का साइज आपको मालूम है तकरीबन 4 से 5 मेगावाट एक विंड टर्बाइन या फॉर एग्जांपल बना रहा होता है। एक उसकी जो विंड टर्बाइन का जो पर है विंग है, उसकी तकरीबन लेंथ 150 से 200 फुट से ज्यादा भी होती है। तो उनको वो खुद हमारे पास आए और वो चाह रहे थे कि यहाँ पे पाकिस्तान में मैन्युफैक्चरिंग करें और पाकिस्तान को बेस बनाए for doing the assembly and manufacturing and taking it to Central Asian Republics or Africa. तो ये वो चीजें हैं जिसकी तरफ हमारे मिनिस्टर ऑफ कॉमर्स भी स्ट्रेस कर रहे हैं, एज अ गवर्नमेंट वी वांट टू स्ट्रेस कि investments in exports in value added products, light engineering, up the value chain, वहाँ पे हम लोग करेंगे और उसके लिए सबसे critical चीज आपकी जरूरत है engineers, technicians. मैंने अभी भी mention किया था हमारे पास when I was in the private sector myself and I'd set up a unit तो मेरे पास I'll give you a small example. जब हम लोग मशीनरी सेटअप कर रहे थे तो मेरे पास जो टेक्नीशियंस बाहर से आए थे तो I had hired some of the best engineers and no disrespect with any engineer but that was not how they were trained. तो मुझसे पूछने के जी ये इंजीनियर है मैंने कहा जी उन्होंने कहा जी इनको मशीनरी लेआउट या प्रैक्टिकली थ्योरी इनकी ठीक है बट प्रैक्टिकल स्किल्स इनके पास नहीं है. तो हमारे पास जो कोट एंड कोट जो वोकेशनल और टेक्निकल ट्रेनिंग यूनिवर्सिटीज और इंस्टीट्यूट्स है उनको हमने ठीक करना है. हमारे पास एक पूरे इस वैल्यू चेन में हमारे पास इंजीनियर्स रिसर्चर्स तो अच्छे आ गए हैं, आपके पास स्किल्ड लेबर आ गई है, अनस्किल्ड आ गई है, आपके पास the magic thing where the magic starts happening a lot as well is आपकी mid management level on the factory और technical floor वो हमारी मिसिंग है जिस पे हमें बहुत इन्वेस्टमेंट करनी है. Over to you, Dr. Saab.
Thank you, ji. Thank you. Mubashir Rizvi Sahab.
Assalamu alaikum, sir. Sir, I am a researcher at a think tank in Lahore. So my question, we recently done a lot of work on FATF, and my question to the minister is how do we balance between external conditions and our growth mechanisms? Sir, आपने बहुत बोला अभी कि घर बैठ के लोग काम कर सकते हैं, but honestly, I'll share two personal experiences with you. So I teach students outside of Pakistan online. मेरी एक स्टूडेंट है उससे मुझे पेमेंट ट्रांसफर करनी है और हमें ये नहीं समझ आ रही कि हम कैसे करें. आई नो कि on the one hand we have to balance with expectations of organizations like the FATF कि you have a check on how the money is coming in, who's sending in the money. लेकिन जब मुझे पैसे रिसीव करने हैं, पेपैल में रिसीव नहीं कर सकता, बैंक के पास में जाता हूँ तो बैंक कहता है कि आपका सिर्फ आपको ब्लड रिलेटिव भेज सकता है. अगर if it's not your blood relative, you need to have extensive paperwork. And में तंग आके you just give up. Secondly, another example, my younger brother, he works in the IT sector, or he has a client in Canada who has put him on a retainer. पहले 3 महीने उसकी पेमेंट आती रही. अब पिछले 3 महीने से UBL जो हमारा बैंक है, and I don't mean to discredit any bank, like it's the same for all banks. 3 महीने से उसकी पेमेंट ब्लॉक हो रही है. We don't know why, we don't know who to go to. तो how is your government balancing, कि हम एक तरफ ये regulations meet करें लेकिन दूसरी तरफ on ground जो घर बैठ के लोग काम करना चाह रहे हैं, ease of doing businesses for small business people, for individuals, उनके लिए असल में is there actually an improvement or is it only for the big businesses?
जी.
Mubashir Rizvi Saab, very pertinent, relevant question, and let me first give you a solution and then we can go on to reasons क्या है. सबसे पहला काम आप ये कीजिएगा कि आप PIDE को reach out करें with a brief email stipulating what you just told me कि आपको मतलब extensive paper trail etc होता है, banks know your client की वजह से and other impediments वो blood relations ना होने की वजह से they are not accepting it. This is a aftershock of know your clients. I've been a former banker myself in operations, so I can empathize and realize what's going on. आप ये कीजिएगा and make sure that it gets to the state bank because ये छोटी-छोटी examples होती हैं जो हम लोग quote करते हैं relevant forum में in the Ministry of Finance with the State Bank, and I'll make sure by this afternoon I also speak to the Governor State Bank, and ये mechanisms जो है ये smoothen out हो, not just for yourself but for the thousands of other people out there. Number 1. Number 2, why is it? PayPal की आपने बात की. PayPal की यहाँ पे head आए हुए थे. उनको हमने कहा यहाँ पे आप why don't you set up shop? Basically, I'll be very blunt. कोई वजह नहीं है कि वो यहाँ पे they don't set up shop. और कभी एक चीज compliance की बहुत सारे और ममालिक हैं जो कि FATF non-compliant है. अमेरिका में खुद कब आते हैं, हम में से बहुत सारे लोग वहां पे रह चुके हैं. वो एक टूल के तौर पे मतलब ये बात चलती रही है और अभी हम लोग अल्हम्दुलिल्लाह यहाँ पे इस वक्त तक हम लोग पहुंच गए कि बहुत सारी जो बातें थी वो क्लियर हो चुकी हैं. So being in a position at this point in time, I'm not going to go into the details के हमारे foreign office और बाकी साथ कुछ की मैं problem create करूँ, but it's something which PayPal को पाकिस्तान में ऑपरेशंस इनिशिएट करने के लिए कोई कबात कोई चीज नहीं है. Should happen. It's now chips हो गया या SWIFT हो गया या ये clearing houses हो गए. You know, it's PayPal is a payment mechanism now. बाकी तो आपकी transmission mechanism है. This is a payment mechanism as well. Should happen. I think I've answered your question. दूसरे दो चीजों के लिए it should happen because इसकी वजह से अभी हमारी जो कनेक्टिविटी है, साइबर कनेक्टिविटी, वो इस हद तक पहुंची है कि लोग देहातों में भी अपना काम जो है वो करके they expect that they will be paid and they should be paid, और foreign remittances जो है which are a large component which funds our current account deficit as well, लोगों को उस पे आसानियां होनी चाहिए, ना कि कबात होनी चाहिए. I hope I've answered your question.
थैंक यू मिनिस्टर साहब, थैंक यू मिनिस्टर साहब. आई माइट पॉइंट आउट कि ये जो हम बहुत कुछ फाटफ के जिम्मे डाल देते हैं, बट अमेरिका में इस किस्म की कोई रिक्वायरमेंट नहीं है कि ब्लड रिलेटिव को पेमेंट जाए. तो पेमेंट तो दुनिया जहान में हर जगह जाती है, और यूरोप में कोई ऐसी रिस्ट्रिक्शन नहीं है. हम एक काम कर रहे हैं, मिनिस्टर साहब आपको भेजेंगे इंशाल्लाह. वी आर वर्किंग ऑन व्हाट वी कॉल अ स्लज सीरीज. वी आर टेकिंग आउट अ स्लज रिपोर्ट एवरी वीक ऑलमोस्ट. स्लज इज व्हाट वी कॉल दलदल, और वो दलदल क्या है? रेगुलेशन की दलदल. फॉर एग्जाम्पल आपने ये बात कही, मेरे साथ आजकल बड़ा मजेदार किस्सा हो रहा है कि मैं अपनी बेटी के साथ एक जॉइंट अकाउंट खोलना चाह रहा हूँ, और वो कहते हैं नहीं आपकी बेटी की इनकम होनी चाहिए. मैंने कहा उसकी इनकम कोई नहीं भाई, मेरी इनकम है. वो कहते नहीं. दूसरी चीज के पैसा डिपॉजिट करने के लिए इनकम दिखाने की क्या जरूरत है भाई? पैसा डिपॉजिट कर रहा हूँ, खींच तो नहीं रहा या कहीं दे नहीं. तो आई थिंक वी गॉट अननेसेसरी रेगुलेशन. हम इस पे काम करें, इंशाल्लाह आपको हर हफ्ते रिपोर्ट भेजेंगे. वी आर डूइंग अ लॉट ऑफ वर्क ऑन दिस. काफी चीजें निकल आई हैं. नवीद अरशद साहब, Naveed Saab, go ahead.
Assalamu alaikum ji.
Introduce yourself quickly and go ahead.
I'm associate professor at LAMS और मेरा काफी गवर्नमेंट के साथ इंटरेक्शन रहता है. One thing that I would like to point out in the policy make one of the flaws इसके जो हमारी बहुत ही highly technical ministries हैं, जैसे energy की ministry है, power की ministry है, generally the decision maker जो कि वहाँ पे आते हैं, secretary, joint secretaries, they come on the job और पहले दिन वो difference मतलब जानते हैं distribution and transmission का. So I'm working in this area for the last 15 years. I'm still learning, and expecting somebody to come on the first day of the job and make decision. और उसी वजह से है कि मौका मिलता है हमारी जो फंडिंग एजेंसीज हैं उनको मतलब इंक्लूड करने का, और वो फिर आपकी उस पर हावी हो जाती हैं. So can we just make this process कि जो लोग इन मिनिस्ट्री आए एटलीस्ट उनका एक बेसिक नॉलेज तो हो इन सेक्टर्स के बारे में. बिकॉज होता ये है कि वो आते हैं जो भी सीन मेकर हैं, अगर नहीं परफॉर्म कर सकते वो चेंज हो जाते हैं, वो साइकिल रिपीट्स अगेन एंड रिपीट्स अगेन. तो ये एक बड़ा अलमिया है, और इसकी वजह से हमारा जो पावर सेक्टर है वो बिल्कुल मतलब डायमंड स्पाइरल में इस टाइम पे विद नो एंड इन साइट.
There is some good point. Number two, SPPS technical position created, advertise उन्होंने किया हुआ है. When I was coming out, तकरीबन आपके हर मिनिस्ट्री में 2-3 स्पेशलिस्ट जो हैं वो दिए जाएंगे for this very factor. जो इस वक्त बोर्ड्स आपके एनटीडीसी के हैं, आपके बाकी बोर्ड्स हैं, लोग जो है प्राइवेट सेक्टर से वहां पे आ चुके हैं, एक्सपर्ट्स इन देयर रिलेटेड फील्ड. नंबर टू जो आपने बात की पावर सेक्टर, एनर्जी सेक्टर में, why was it in a tailspin? I'll just take 1 minute of your time just to put things in perspective. Basically आपका जो lopsided पेमेंट शेड्यूल्स जो बन गए हैं आपके, फॉर एग्जांपल लॉट ऑफ दीस कैपेसिटी पेमेंट्स जो आ गई हैं, टेक और पे कॉन्ट्रैक्ट्स फॉर द बेनिफिट ऑफ द अदर पीपल. नवीद अरशद साहब इज एक्सपर्ट इन दिस फील्ड. फॉर द बेनिफिट ऑफ द अदर पार्टिसिपेंट्स, आपका टेक और पे कॉन्ट्रैक्ट क्या है? इस वक्त गवर्नमेंट ऑफ पाकिस्तान जो है वो वाहिद बायर है ऑफ एनर्जी इन द कंट्री, नंबर 1. नंबर 2, जो बिजली आपने बना के बेचनी है वो गवर्नमेंट ऑफ पाकिस्तान का एक इदारा है CPPA, उसको बेचेंगे और किसी को नहीं बेचेंगे, चाहे वो प्राइवेट IPPs हो, चाहे तरबेला डैम गवर्नमेंट का हाइडल प्रोजेक्ट हो, या न्यूक्लियर का हो, कराची न्यूक्लियर प्लांट या चश्मा. वो चीज अभी हम लोगों ने पहली बार ये किया कि जी हम लोगों ने आपका CTBCM क्रिएट किया है. दैट मींस कंपेटिटिव ट्रेडिंग बायलैटरल मार्केट. उसके साथ क्या होगा? That my portfolio was changed in March, so by approximately next 12 to 14 months, आपका 20% जो एनर्जी मिक्स है मुल्क का, होलसेल एनर्जी जो बिकती है वो आप मतलब जो एनर्जी बिकती है वो होलसेल आपके बायर्स उसको उठा सकेंगे 20% ऑफ द मिक्स. तो अप्रोक्सीमेटली आपका या 25,000 मेगावाट है, उसमें से 20% is going to be sold and bought directly between the producer and the consumer, number one. और उसका होगा क्या प्रोग्रेशन, जो इंटरनेशनल बेंचमार्क्स हैं कि 5 से 8 सालों के अंदर अंदर आपका कंज्यूमर जो है वो भी ये चूज कर सकेगा कि मैंने जो है वो बिजली XYZ से मैंने खरीदनी है, क्योंकि वो मुझे कंपेटिटिव रेट्स देंगे और बिलिंग के जरिए जो वायर और मीटर बिजनेस है वो कोई और इस्तेमाल कर रहा होगा, व्हीलिंग के चार्जेस वो लेके आपको बिजली पहुंचा देंगे. सो दैट इज वन थिंग, आई थिंक दैट विल क्रिएट अ लॉट ऑफ जो बॉटल अप हुआ है आपके कैपेसिटी पेमेंट्स वो क्लियर होंगे. इस वक्त when the government came in 2018, आपके capacity payments were approximately 650 billion rupees a year. This last year it was 856 billion rupees. By 2023 it will be 1450 billion rupees capacity charges. Why? आपके ये फ्रंट लोडेड है. उसकी वजह उसकी मैं आपको मिसाल देता हूं कि आपका पावर प्लांट 20 साल का है, आपने इंटरेस्ट ऑफ प्रिंसिपल की अदायगी 10 सालों में करनी है, क्योंकि आपका बैंकिंग इंस्ट्रूमेंट नहीं है इस वक्त कि जो उसके लाइफ साइकिल ऑफ द प्रोजेक्ट को मैच कर सके. जब आप वो 20 साल की इंटरेस्ट ऑफ प्रिंसिपल पेमेंट्स आप स्क्वीज करते हैं 10 सालों में, तो आपकी कैपेसिटी पेमेंट्स बढ़ जाती हैं. और उसके साथ क्या होता है कि आपका जो टैरिफ स्ट्रक्चर है, जिसको हमारे आपको नवीद साहब मालूम होगा कि क्वार्टरली टैरिफ एडजस्टमेंट्स जिस पर होती हैं, तो वो वहां पे प्लग इन हो जाती हैं और वो टैरिफ एकदम इंक्रीज हो जाता है. एट द एंड ऑफ द डे आपको फिर डिस्ट्रीब्यूशन कंपनीज की तरफ या आते हैं, तो डिस्ट्रीब्यूशन कंपनीज में when I was there we invested close to 80 billion rupees और अभी भी इन्वेस्टमेंट्स उनमें जारी है कि इस वक्त आपके पास या 8,886 फीडर है. उन फीडर्स को अपग्रेड करना, 80% आपके फीडर्स क्लियर है, आपके 20% लो परफॉर्मिंग डिस्कोस में प्रॉब्लम है. द प्रॉब्लम इज नॉट इन ISO, लेस्को, मेको भी तकरीबन बेहतर हो गया था, या फिर आपका फेस्को में. दीज आर गुड परफॉर्मिंग डिस्कोस. इशू आ रहा है आपका पेस्को में पेशावर, आपका क्वेटा इलेक्ट्रिक बिकॉज ऑफ द ट्यूबवेल इशू, दैट्स अ सेपरेट इशू. Q&A में हम लोग उस पे बात कर सकेंगे. और हेस्को में और सेटको में वहां पे मेजर, अभी हेस्को और सेटको में मेजर इन्वेस्टमेंट्स गई हैं. सो टू आंसर योर क्वेश्चन के टेक्निकल एक्सपर्टीज जो है बोर्ड्स लगा दी गए, प्रोफेशनल्स लगा दिए गए. Let's wait for the results to come in. But basic issue, the elephant in the room is the large capacity payments which are hanging on our head and which are accumulating because of the contracts and the energy projects which were made. और उसके साथ साथ जो आपके प्लांट जो थे, लास्ट इंटरजेक्शन एंड देन ओवर टू यू डॉक्टर साहब, कि तकरीबन 4,500 मेगावाट के आपके फॉसिल फ्यूल के प्लांट्स लगा दिए गए थे in the last 2 years of the previous government, and renewable energy projects of 4,000 megawatts was scrapped. That's food for thought. Over to you, Doctor.
Thank you, Ji Minister Sir. But I think we should also recognize right here that the IPPs were designed by the World Bank. That whole policy was designed by the World Bank with absolutely no review by any domestic audience. I was in Washington in those days, and I used to talk to the World Bank, and I used to tell them that from an economic point of view, because we economists are taught to believe that there should be no sovereign guarantees anywhere, especially to the private sector. तो वो उन्होंने कर दिया. तो अब हम उनको फिर भी सोचते हैं solution of the problem is them. But let's move on. Shahid Saab, last question. Shahid Saab.
Assalamu alaikum. Am I audible?
You are. बोलिए.
Thank you, Minister Saab. Just a few, just a quick suggestion.
Quick introduction.
Quick introduction ये है कि मेरा नाम शाहिद महमूद है. I am research fellow at PIDE. Thank you for the talk, Minister Saab. Just एक brief से suggestion है और एक request है. Suggestion ये है सर कि अगर ये जितने भी donor related projects है, donor finance projects है, अगर EAD इकोनॉमिक अफेयर्स मिनिस्ट्री जो है इसका अपने पैसों से विदाउट एनी इन्वॉल्वमेंट ऑफ डोनर मनी इसका एक एनालिसिस करवा लिया करें, what is the outcome of all those donor finance projects. So I'm sure it would be a very good learning exercise. ये एक सजेशन है. दूसरा सर एक रिक्वेस्ट भी और सजेशन भी है. You talked about making a strategy, a development strategy or a growth strategy. I'm sure from what I listened, तो सर रिक्वेस्ट है कि PIDE ने rapid growth strategy बनाई है. Our team has made a rapid growth strategy. So please, if you go through that I'm sure there wouldn't be any need. You would find that there isn't any need for any new growth strategy. That would be enough. Thank you.
Thank you.
Shahid Sahab, last comment on the rapid growth strategy. Rapid growth strategy में हम लोग already PIDE के आपके साथियों को हमने incorporate किया था on the current account deficit, financing, analysis, etc. और growth strategy जो है, जब भी World Bank का हमारा भी next cycle आएगा, I'll be sure, I'm glad you mentioned it, I'll be sure that we include PIDE in it as well. Number one, जो आपका analysis of outcome है, you hit the nail on the head in the sense कि मेरी परसों भी वर्ल्ड बैंक की टीम के साथ यहाँ पे बात हुई थी एंड ऐसे कि जी आपके ये प्रोजेक्ट्स, हमारा जो प्रोजेक्ट आता है तो उस प्रोजेक्ट के अंदर आउटकम्स मेजर होते हैं. व्हाट आर द वेरिएबल्स दैट वी आर, व्हाट आर द मैट्रिक्स, वो मैट्रिक डिजाइन कौन कर रहा है, वो मैट्रिक डिटरमिन कौन कर रहा है, वो मैट्रिक मेजर कौन कर रहा है. सो वी हैव टू इवन गो, हम लोग तो इतना निटी-ग्रिटी में जाना चाहते हैं कि भाई हमें बता. मैं आपको एग्जांपल देता हूं. Irrigation, आपकी lining of canal, I'm taking a project out of thin air. मतलब for example, lining of canals है. Lining of canals में आपने फर्ज मान $4 million इन्वेस्ट कर दिए. Excellent work. आपने क्या उसका outcome, not output. Output तो आपने वो कर दिया. उसका outcome क्या है? क्या वो खानों की मतलब पुख्तगी के साथ आपकी क्रॉपिंग पैटर्न में कोई चेंज आया, आपकी क्रॉप प्रोडक्टिविटी में बेहतरी आई, वो मेजर कौन कर रहा है, वो कौन सा इदारा है कि वो रिपोर्ट जो है वो मुतलका साहिबान को पहुंचा सके कि जी इसके साथ आपकी क्रॉप प्रोडक्टिविटी में फॉर एग्जांपल मल्टीपल ऑफ 3 या 4 टाइम्स इंक्रीज आया है, लिहाजा आपका कॉस्ट बेनिफिट एनालिसिस हमारा ये कहता है कि आप बाकी जगहों में भी इसको रेप्लिकेट करें और इन टाइम रेप्लिकेट करें क्योंकि इसके साथ आपकी ओवरऑल फूड बास्केट जो है वो सिक्योर होती है. सो दीज आर द सॉर्ट ऑफ थिंग्स दैट वी आर आस्किंग and I'm glad you've asked this question. This is a very, very important facet which for some reason gets, it goes through the cracks और लोग पूछते नहीं है कि जी आउटकम हमें बताएं और आउटकम के मेजर के जो वेरिएबल्स हैं वो मेजर कौन करेगा. These are the sort of questions that we are putting forward and we want answers to those and we want it put in stone कि जी ये चीजें हमने मेजर करनी है. पहले क्या नहीं हुई उसके बारे में हम लोग बात नहीं कर सकते पर आगे मुस्तकबिल में ये सवाल अभी हाल में हम लोग पूछते हैं और इसका हमें सॉल्यूशन भी चाहिए. Over to you, Dr. Saab.
Thank you, Ji. Thank you, Minister Saab. Very quickly, before I thank you and let you go, let me quickly pose 2 or 3 very small questions to you. One is, Minister Saab, I think you will appreciate that dumping happens in the goods markets. If somebody sends us cheap television, some country, let's say China, Qatar, whatever, they send us cheap televisions, we will say it's dumping. If they subsidize their own industry to produce cheap pens, we will say it's dumping. Now, Minister Saab, we have the aid industry here that is subsidizing their own firms, their own contractors, the Chemonics of the world, the DIs of the world, the IGCs of the world, etc. There are so many of these who come in here at a subsidy with their foreign consultants, and they dump on your universities. You're creating universities, maybe 1 a day, and yet those universities are lying useless. So do we have any recourse to this dumping? I've approached the National Tariff Commission, I've approached the Competition Commission. They don't understand it. Can we talk about this dumping at a policy level, that should our universities be dumped upon in the sense that universities don't have money to pay salaries, we don't have money to print books, and there is a consultant who comes in here at $5,000 a day, and there is a consulting firm that has $200-300 million a day, which is more than your universities combined. Do you have any reactions on the dumping problem? Or do you think it's
very absolutely pertinent, Dr. Saab. I think both of us have our work cut out for us. I'll be more than happy to sit down with you and take forward what we were discussing. And I was alluding to this fact during our the discourse we've been having since the last 1 hour. I think we have our work cut out for us. Let's work on this. Very important.
Minister Saab, my second small point is, do we really think about how much debt we need? Because I find that we've written about it many times, that we are still sitting in the model, what I call the Huck-Hag model, Mahbub ul Haq and the Harvard Advisory Group model. There used to be a growth theory way back, even before I started studying economics, which is a long time ago, which said that developing countries, it was called the two-gap model. Developing countries are poor. They have a savings investment gap. They have low savings, high investment, and they somehow need to build more physical capital. Secondly, they have a dollar gap because they can't find dollars, so they have to borrow. We are still sitting in that theory that we need to borrow. Why do we need to borrow? Because we have to build brick and mortar. We've written books about it, that we need to move out of that model. We need to get into the new model. My class fellow, Paul Romer, won the Nobel Prize 2 years ago. His professor, our professor again, Robert Lucas, won the Nobel Prize in 1996. Now, this endogenous growth theory, as we call it, has been around for the last 40 years. This growth theory simply says one thing, that developing countries are not poor because they don't have money. Developing countries are poor because they don't have ideas. And what we've created is an idea-poor economy and a debt economy. How is the government going to deal with the issue of idea poverty? And quite frankly, when you think of idea poverty, you don't need all this debt. Why are we building brick and mortar more than we should? Any thoughts on that, Minister?
Absolutely, Dr. Saab. In fact, I would encourage you कि जो अभी अगले हफ्ते हमारी मीटिंग होगी, in which I had invited your colleagues from PIDE on this very factor कि हमारा current account का जो nomenclature है, उसको हम लोग जब देख रहे हैं, उसको उसकी variations, उसकी sensitivity analysis run करने के लिए, because at the end of the day, जितना आपका current account deficit version होगा, जितना increase होगा, वो कहाँ से fund कहाँ से होगा? तो डेट लेना पड़ेगा. तो डेट हमने जो इनर मार्कर, आउटर मार्कर, मिडिल मार्कर जो हमने रखने हैं, व्हाट विल आवर इकोनॉमी बी, जो इन दोनों टास्क फोर्सेस को, ग्रुप्स को मैंने जो टास्क दिया था कि वी शुड बी लुकिंग एट, एंड वी गॉट द डेट ऑफिस इन द मिनिस्ट्री ऑफ फाइनेंस, आवरसेल्व्स, पाइड, everyone working together for the first time कि हम लोगों ने, we have to have a complexion of what should our economy be 10 years from now. We should have some sort of a fungible figures to work with based on analytics, based on where we are now. It shouldn't be a pie in the sky. It shouldn't be a moonshot completely, but कोई ना कोई चीज तो सामने आनी चाहिए. Visibility हमारे आनी चाहिए, और उस पे I would encourage you कि आप जरूर खुद भी आइएगा, because we learn from your experience as well. This is exactly the question that we are asking ourselves, and we want to जब तक हमारे पास वो path नहीं होगा कि जी हमारे पास ये प्रोफाइल है, हमारे एक्सपोर्ट्स की, हमारी इंपोर्ट्स की, हमारे करंट अकाउंट डेफिसिट की, हमारी डेट प्रोफाइल की, हमारी डेट पेमेंट्स की, वी वोंट गेट वेयर वी वांट टू बी. उसके साथ क्योंकि आपका मिनिस्ट्री ऑफ कॉमर्स है, वी वांटेड टू पुल इन कॉमर्स एज वेल, इंडस्ट्रीज है, तो ये एफपीआर है, रेवेन्यू है. सो अ लॉट ऑफ दी स्मॉल मूविंग पार्ट्स जो कि आइसोलेशन में थे, वी हैव टू गेट देम ऑल टुगेदर एंड देन कम फॉरवर्ड एंड से कि जी एक ये टेम्पलेट हम लोग बना रहे हैं. These are the numbers जो कि आप sensitivity run करके कर सकते हैं, देख सकते हैं, and this is the end result we are looking at, to have a sustainable growth rate in which our debt to GDP ratio is going down, and this is the debt that we can live with, not 80%, not, for example, a high debt ratio. This is a debt ratio that we can live in, and also, what is the nomenclature of debt? Are we going to use it for supporting the rupee at an artificial level? और जिस तरह पहले भी किया, $24 अरब जो है वो भुगते हैं, क्या उसके लिए हमें डेट चाहिए, या फिर डेट हमें चाहिए कि जो जरूरी चीजें हैं, फॉर एग्जांपल आपका स्मॉल टाउन्स का इंफ्रास्ट्रक्चर ठीक करने के लिए, आपका ड्रिंकिंग वाटर सप्लाई स्कीम, आपका वाटर सैनिटेशन, लेट्स फेस इट, लेट्स गो टू अ स्मॉल अर्बन, पेरी अर्बन, रूरल एरियाज. जो हमारे पास इस वक्त हेल्थ के इश्यूज का एक प्रेडोमिनेंट इशू भी जो आ रहा है, जो जिसका alluded to, is where the water pipes are being mixed with sewage and sanitation. A complete ecosystem has to be developed for waste disposal. So all these things are interconnected. So I'll be very happy if you could
Thank you,
come into that.
Very kind, Ji. We'll definitely do that. This is a final point that I'd like to make is that we try and get more and more debt, but we are a leaky ship. We leak like sieve or something. We leak all the time. For example, IPPs, ये अपना energy में हमारा 12 ट्रिलियन का नुकसान हो चुका है पिछले 10 साल में, हमने estimate किया है. हमारा वो क्या कहते हैं SOEs में हमारा पता नहीं कितना नुकसान हो चुका है. I think again roughly about $1 trillion, trillion rupees a year we almost lose in SOEs, railway, PIE वगैरह वगैरह. और ये पिछले 10-12 साल में बल्कि ज़्यादा 20-30 साल से चीज़ चल रही है. And the government doesn't seem to, I don't mean this government, no government, I mean the government of Pakistan, whoever is in power, doesn't seem to devote enough resources to trying to understand these issues. For example, आप एनर्जी के मिनिस्टर भी रहे हैं, हमारे पास एक एनर्जी की रिपोर्ट नहीं है जो डोमेस्टिकली प्रोड्यूस्ड हो. ADB वर्ल्ड बैंक करते हैं हमारे लिए, डोमेस्टिकली हमने अभी तक एनर्जी को जोर नहीं दिया. बट I'll turn away from that. That's not the important point. I'd like to bring another very interesting issue on the table कि रिकोडेक है. अब रिकोडेक हमारा प्रोजेक्ट 30-40 साल से चल रहा था, उसकी बड़ी चीजें हुई हैं उस पर, I won't go into the details. पर जो मुझे बड़ी मजेदार बात लगी है कि रिकोडेक 30 साल से चल रहा है, 6 बिलियन रुपए हम हार चुके हैं, उसमें बड़े बल और चीजें हैं जो हम करते रहते हैं बातें. The tragedy is there's no serious report on रिकोडेक either. And the tragedy is कि $6 billion का नुकसान हो गया है. And also the tragedy is कि अब उनको हम वापस बुलाएंगे घुटनों पे बैठ के और उनकी बात पूरी मानेंगे, बल्कि वो हमें और भी खराब डील देंगे. और हम जो रिसोर्स है अपना 2% पे बेच रहे हैं, 2% से भी शायद कम हो गया अब हमें मिलेगा. तो ये हमारी नाअहली थी, इसमें और कोई चीज नहीं थी, सिर्फ नाअहली थी. बट द इंटरेस्टिंग क्वेश्चन आई वांट टू आस्क यू विद रिगार्ड टू फॉरेन एड, बाकी रिकॉर्डिंग की बात छोड़ दे, वो हम किसी और वक्त करेंगे, कि जेफरी सैक्स एक बहुत बड़ा इकोनॉमिस्ट है. जेफरी सैक्स ने आर्टिकल लिखा पाकिस्तान की फेवर में. उसने कहा ये वर्ल्ड बैंक ने आपसे बहुत ज्यादती की है और आप लोग वर्ल्ड बैंक से इक्सिट से जरा आप बात करें और समझें. हमने जेफरी सैक्स को बिल्कुल इग्नोर कर दिया, हमारे मीडिया ने भी, हमारी हुकूमत ने भी. हालांकि मैं सोचता हूं कि उसको मैं बुला के उसको और सराहना चाहिए था कि भाई तू कर ये बात हमारे लिए, बहुत बड़ा आदमी है, वो अमेरिका के खिलाफ भी बात कर रहा है. अच्छा, जेफरी सैक्स को हमने रिसेंटली वेबिनार पे बुलाया एंड ही सेड द सेम थिंग कि यार व्हाई आर यू गाइस टेकिंग इट लाइंग डाउन. तो माय क्वेश्चन टू यू इज कि हम जो ये बायलैटरल इन्वेस्टमेंट ट्रीटी साइन कर लेते हैं, बायलैटरल फलानी ट्रीटी which I think quite frankly we sign these things without reading them. ICSID की treaty, for example, we've signed these things without reading them. Many countries are not a part of ICSID. Many countries are not a part of these bilateral agreements. So are you doing anything about that, or are we rushing headlong into giving our sovereignty over to others and just leaking like a sieve? ICSID ने हमारे खिलाफ वो कारके का भी प्रोजेक्ट में दिया, ICSID में IPP के खिलाफ भी दिया. ICSID is always against us. This is what Jeffrey Sachs is saying. ICSID is always against us. What are we doing about it? जी.
Very valid question. I'll start off with Karki. वो तो हमने alhamdulillah retrieve कर दिया था. I was involved with the team and did a phenomenal job. And वो आपसे bilaterally बैठ के मैं बताऊंगा what all happened and how that project was retrieved, in the sense that we didn't have to pay anything for it, और 0-0 पे clear हो गया था. So that disaster was averted. Ricodeck और इन चीजों पे डॉक्टर साहब, I'm not going to venture into territory full of IEDs because यहाँ पे courts का मामला आ जाता है. I'm not going to comment on that. I think let's suffice it to say that whoever is adjudicating upon such issues, they should also have the background, I would say, of what goes on in the world or commercial deals के ऊपर उन चीजों को मद्देनजर जरूर रखना चाहिए जिस वक्त एडजुडिकेशन हो रही होती है हमारी लीगल फ्रेटर्निटी के. नंबर 1, उसके रिपरकशंस होते हैं और वो फिर एक नहीं मल्टीपल हुकूमतों को और लोगों को उसका मुआवजा करना पड़ता है. एक बायलैटरल की बात आप कर रहे हैं, बिल्कुल. ये तकरीबन महीने पहले भी हमारी कैबिनेट में डिस्कशन किसी भी हो रही थी कि बायलैटरल एग्रीमेंट्स की जगह हमारे पास जो ओवरऑल बाकी एग्रीमेंट्स हैं उसको प्रेफरेंस दिया जाए. बायलैटरल एग्रीमेंट्स आप करते हैं उसके साथ इश्यूज क्रिएट होते हैं. आई थिंक आई शुड स्पाइस यही तक अपने आप को मैं महदूद रखूंगा. अदरवाइज आई विल गो इनटू द टेरिटरी ऑफ द मिनिस्ट्री ऑफ लॉ और अदर मिनिस्ट्रीज.
मिनिस्टर साहब, थैंक यू वेरी मच.
सॉरी, एनर्जी के बारे में आपने बात की. एनर्जी की नेपरा जो है अपनी एनुअल रिपोर्ट देता होता है और प्लानिंग कमीशन में आपके कॉलीग ही हैं मेंबर प्लानिंग, वो भी शायर करते हैं. सो दीस आर 2 reports at least which come out, but a lot more can be done with good analysis. Over to you.
Thank you very much, Ji. Thank you very much, Minister Saab. You've been very kind. You've been very candid. I admire your candidness, and I admire the fact that you've answered the questions very well. Thank you very much, Minister Saab. We'll remain engaged, inshallah.
Thank you very much, sir.
PIDE is always with you. PIDE is your agency. We will work with you. Thank you.
Thank you very much. God bless. Thank you.
All the best to you. Khuda Hafiz.